On November 1st, 2025, a very important meeting took place in Gyeongju, an old and beautiful city in South Korea. Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung met face-to-face. This was a historic event because President Xi had not visited South Korea in over 11 years. It was a big moment for both countries and for the whole world. South Korea finds itself in a difficult spot between two very powerful countries, the United States and China. The United States is a key partner for South Korea's safety and defense. At the same time, China is South Korea's biggest trading partner and very important for its economy. So President Lee Jae-myung has the hard job of keeping good relations with both giants. He tries to find a path that helps South Korea stay strong and safe. The world was watching closely to see what would happen at this summit. Just before this meeting, U.S. President Donald Trump also visited South Korea. He had important talks and left the region. This made the meeting between President Xi and President Lee even more significant. It showed South Korea's effort to balance its ties with different global powers. The discussions in Gyeongju were not just about China and South Korea. They were about the peace and future of all East Asia. The decisions made during this meeting could change how countries work together for many years to come. President Lee hoped to build new, better ways for the region to cooperate and grow. The future of trade, security, and peace in this part of the world was truly in the balance. 2. The Big Meeting. The big meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung started on November 1st, 2025. The Gyeongju National Museum in South Korea was the special place for this important event. It was President Xi's first visit to South Korea in over 11 years. President Lee had become president in June 2025. He wanted to change South Korea's foreign policy. This meeting was a way to show that. The summit happened on the last day of President Xi's 3-day visit to South Korea. This visit also took place during the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, summit. The timing was very important. President Xi arrived just after U.S. President Donald Trump had finished his own visit to South Korea on October 30th. President Trump left, giving President Xi space to be the main focus at APEC. This allowed the Chinese leader to take a central role. The welcome ceremony was very formal. Soldiers in traditional clothes stood in long lines as a special guard of honor. Both President Lee and President Xi walked slowly, reviewing these soldiers together. This showed how much South Korea valued the meeting. President Lee spoke first. He told President Xi that he had long looked forward to meeting you in person. President Lee shared his hopes for a new, more equal relationship between their countries. He said he wanted their economic cooperation to change. He wished for it to be more horizontal and mutually beneficial. This meant both nations would work as equals and benefit fairly. Then President Xi spoke. He used careful words to describe the bond between China and South Korea. He said they were important neighbors that cannot be moved. He also called them partners that cannot be separated. President Xi talked about how the two countries should respect each other's societal differences and development paths. He also added that they should resolve contradictions and disagreements through friendly consultation. This showed that China wanted to work with South Korea even with their differences. The meeting marked a new start for the two nations. 3. New agreements. After their important talks, the leaders of China and South Korea made many decisions together. They signed 7 new agreements. These deals covered different areas like money, trade, farming, law enforcement, and technology. This was a big step to make their countries closer partners and improve their relationship. The most important deal was about their money. They renewed a currency swap agreement. This means that China and South Korea can exchange their money, the won and the yuan, easily. This agreement is worth 70 trillion won, which is about 49 billion US dollars. It will last for 5 years. This swap helps to make their financial markets strong and stable. It also helps trade between the two countries. Bank of Korea Governor Ri Chang-yong and Chinese Central Bank Vice Governor Dai Bing signed this important deal. The old agreement ended in October 2025, so renewing it showed strong economic ties again. The leaders also agreed on a long-term plan for their economies. This plan, called the Korea-China Economic Cooperation Plan, will be for the years 2026 to 2030. It will guide how their economies work together in the future. They also signed a deal to improve trade in services. This will help them work on new free trade rules for services and investment. New rules were also made to help people. They agreed to work together to stop online crimes like voice phishing and fraud. This shows they want to keep their citizens safe from bad online activities. Furthermore, they agreed on deals to help Korean farms. For example, fresh persimmon fruit can now be sold to China more easily. Other agreements will help with older people's needs and new inventions. South Korea's National Security Advisor Wi Sung-lak stated that these agreements fully brought back good relations between Korea and China. He called this a pragmatic way to lead, focusing on what is best for the country. These new agreements aim to make both countries stronger and safer together. 4. The North Korea problem. President Lee focused on a very important issue, the North Korea problem. He asked President Xi for China's help to start talks again with North Korea. Lee felt positive about this. He mentioned that China and North Korea had held high-level meetings recently. He thought these meetings helped create good conditions for new talks with Pyongyang. Lee hoped China could use its ties to encourage North Korea to return to the discussion table. President Lee clearly explained his idea for a peaceful way forward. He suggested a three-step plan to stop North Korea's nuclear weapon program. The first step was for North Korea to freeze or stop all its nuclear and missile tests and production. The second step involved North Korea slowly reducing its existing arsenal of nuclear weapons. Finally, the third step was for North Korea to completely get rid of all its nuclear weapons. This was a clear pathway that President Lee put forward during the summit. He wanted China's support to make this plan happen. President Xi, on his side, said China was willing to work more closely with South Korea. He spoke about dealing with shared problems. Beijing promised to help make the Korean peninsula stable and peaceful. She also agreed that talks between the United States and North Korea were very important for the future. However, Chinese state media reports did not give many details about how China would specifically help with North Korea. They focused more on other types of cooperation between China and South Korea, like new technologies or helping older people. The exact steps China would take to influence North Korea remained unclear. There was a big difficulty, though. Only one day before President Lee and President Xi met, North Korea had already shown its strong opinion. North Korea had called President Lee's peace proposal an unrealistic pipe dream. They clearly rejected the idea of talking with South Korea. North Korea said it might consider talks with the United States, but only if the conditions were different. This showed the limits of China's power. Even with China's close ties, North Korea did not always listen. Beijing itself had reasons to be careful. North Korea's military cooperation with Russia, especially in the Ukraine conflict, was important to China. Pushing North Korea too hard on denuclearization could upset this other important relationship for China. This made China's influence on North Korea's nuclear plans not as strong as South Korea might have hoped. 5. Old problems. The leaders also talked about hard issues from the past. These were problems that had made relations between the two countries difficult for a long time. One big problem was the American THAAD missile system. South Korea uses this system for defense against missiles. China does not like it. They believe it can be used to watch their country's military movements. President Lee and President Xi discussed this sensitive topic. South Korea's National Security Advisor, Wee Sung-lak, later told the press that they would continue to communicate on this issue at a working level. This showed that the problem was still present and no concrete solution had been found during the summit. It remained a point of tension. Another old problem was the ban on South Korean culture in China. Since 2017, China has not allowed many South Korean movies and music. This started after South Korea put the THAAD system in place. At the meeting, the leaders spoke about cultural exchanges, but the informal ban was not removed. This also shows that some old problems are hard to solve quickly. The two leaders also discussed sanctions China placed on Hanwha Ocean, a South Korean defense company. These sanctions were because of Hanwha Ocean's work with the United States on missile defense. This issue also added to the old tensions between the two countries. Outside the meeting in Seoul, many people were not happy. Hundreds of people gathered to protest. They were in the Hongdae shopping area. They held signs that said, "Love Korea, love self," and "China out." They shouted words against China and communism. One protester, a 64-year-old woman named Kim Hae-kyung, said she was there to support democracy in South Korea. Earlier, President Lee Jae-myung had told officials to stop these kinds of protests. He was worried that they would hurt South Korea's image and economy. These protests showed that not everyone in South Korea agreed with the meeting or working closely with China. 6. A world of problems. South Korea found itself in a very hard place. It was like standing in the middle of two giants, America and China, both pulling in different directions. This small country, with about 52 million people, needed both of them for different reasons. America was very important for South Korea's safety. Their military alliance went back to the Korean War, a long time ago. America protected South Korea, especially from North Korea. But China was just as important for South Korea's money and businesses. About 1/4 of all the things South Korea sold went to China. Also, 1/4 of all the things South Korea bought came from China. If South Korea made China angry, its economy would suffer a lot. President Lee Jae-myung had a new idea for how South Korea should act in the world. He called it pragmatic diplomacy, or pragmatic flexibility. This meant that South Korea would make decisions based on what was best for its own country, not just picking sides based on old ideas or friendships. He wanted to find a way to work well with both America and China. This was a change from the president before him, who was closer to America. This new way was very difficult because America and China were having a big trade war. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, wanted South Korea to pay more money on its goods. He wanted tariffs, which are like extra taxes, of 25% on South Korean products. This would hurt South Korean businesses a lot. President Lee had to talk to Donald Trump to find a solution. After many talks, South Korea promised to invest a lot of money in America, about $350 billion. $200 billion was cash, and $150 billion was for building ships. In return, Donald Trump agreed to lower the tariffs to 15%. This was still high, but better than 25%. This deal showed how much South Korea was becoming part of America's defense and factory system. Because of this pressure from America, South Korea needed to make sure its economy was still strong with China. The new deals made at the summit, like the currency swap agreement, were very important. They helped South Korea keep its money stable and its businesses safe. President Lee was trying to walk a very thin line, making both powerful countries happy, even though they were fighting each other. It was a world full of problems for South Korea. 7. A surprise from America. Just before President Lee Jae-myung and President Xi Jinping met for their big summit, another important leader came to South Korea. This was U.S. President Donald Trump. He arrived in South Korea on October 30, 2025, for a short but important visit. His visit happened right before the main APEC meeting, which was taking place in South Korea. While he was there, President Trump had a meeting with President Xi of China. They talked about trade and other important matters. Their discussion lasted for about 100 minutes. After this meeting, something unexpected happened. President Trump decided to leave the APEC summit early. He flew back to the United States before the main leaders' talks at APEC even began. His early departure meant that President Xi had the stage to himself at the remaining APEC events. But before President Trump left, he made a very big and surprising announcement. He told South Korea that America would now give it permission to build special submarines. These submarines would use nuclear power to move. This was a huge change in policy. For many years, the United States had not shared this kind of advanced technology with other countries. Giving it to South Korea showed how much America wanted to help its close ally. These nuclear-powered submarines would be able to travel long distances and stay underwater for a very long time. They could also gather information and provide strong defense. This news had a clear message. South Korea's military would become much stronger, with America's full support. The plan was even to build these submarines in American shipyards, which also helped American jobs. However, this surprise announcement also made the situation more difficult, especially for relations with China. China saw these new powerful submarines as a problem. They worried about them operating in the Yellow Sea, which is close to China's coast. China felt that this move increased the American presence and power in the region. This made China unhappy and more cautious. President Lee Jae-myung was already trying to find a careful balance between America and China. This announcement from President Trump made Lee's diplomatic work even harder. On one hand, South Korea was happy to receive such advanced military technology. On the other hand, they knew China would not like it. This surprise from America added a new and challenging problem to the already complex relationship between South Korea, China, and the United States, right before the historic summit between Lee and Xi. 8. What happens next? The recent meeting between President Xi and President Lee was a diplomatic success in many ways. It brought real economic benefits for South Korea. The two countries signed several important agreements. One key deal was the renewal of the currency swap, valued at 70 trillion won. This agreement helps to keep their financial markets stable and promotes trade between the two nations. It clearly showed South Korea's desire to maintain strong economic ties and cooperation with China. Both leaders spoke of respect and partnership, aiming to reset their relationship. However, the summit did not solve the biggest strategic problems. South Korea is still in a very difficult position. It needs to maintain close ties with both the United States for security and China for its large economy and trade. This balancing act makes South Korea's foreign policy very complex. The country often feels caught between these two global giants. The events of that week highlighted these challenges. Just before the summit, U.S. President Donald Trump visited South Korea. During his visit, he made a notable announcement. He gave South Korea permission to build nuclear-powered submarines. This decision showed that South Korea is deeply connected to the U.S. security framework. From China's perspective, such a move could be seen as the U.S. strengthening its military presence in the region. This further complicates South Korea's efforts to keep good relations with China. The summit ultimately showed how difficult it is for smaller countries to survive and make choices in a world where powerful nations compete. South Korea aims for a policy known as pragmatic diplomacy. This means making decisions that are best for its own national interests rather than fully taking one side. Yet, the actions of the United States and China often pressure countries like South Korea to choose. Therefore, the November 1st meeting bought some valuable time for South Korea. It helped to restart important economic cooperation with China and opened lines for dialogue. But it did not resolve the deeper underlying tensions. South Korea continues to face the significant challenge of managing relationships with two powerful countries whose goals do not always align. What do you think will happen next for South Korea as it tries to navigate this difficult international situation?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.